The orbital scrapyard floated like a graveyard of broken dreams. Hundreds of dead ships drifted in the darkness, their hulls scarred and their engines cold. This was where vessels came to die, picked apart by salvagers looking for anything worth selling. Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle and immediately felt every alien eye turn toward him. His boots clanged against the metal platform as he walked through the main corridor of the salvage station. Conversation stopped. A few aliens even laughed. Humans weren't common out here in the outer sectors, and when they did show up, it was usually because they were lost or stupid. Jake was neither, but he was fine letting them think otherwise. The station master was a creature called Vree. He looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a lobster and given it 6 arms. His species had been in the salvage business for 3,000 years, and Vree had personally seen more shipwrecks than most humans had seen sunrises. "You're the human who sent the message?" Vree's voice came through a translator box that hung around what Jake assumed was his neck. The device made him sound like he was talking through a tin can. "That's me," Jake said, trying not to stare at Vree's compound eyes. "I'm here about the Earth ship in Bay 7. Vree's antennae twitched. In his species, that meant amusement. "The Horizon Runner? That piece of junk. That's the one. Come. I'll show you your mistake." They walked through the station, passing salvage crews from a dozen different species. Jake saw a group of 4-armed Keltos stripping copper wiring from what looked like a Martian cargo hauler. 2 floating gas beings were carefully extracting a navigation core from a merchant vessel. Everyone was busy taking apart the dead to sell the pieces. Bay 7 was at the far end of the station, where they kept the ships that nobody wanted. The ones too damaged, too old, or too worthless to bother with. And there she was. The Horizon Runner looked like she'd been through hell and barely crawled out. Her hull was scorched black in places, pitted with micrometeorite impacts in others. One of her engine nacelles was completely missing. The cargo bay doors hung open like a broken jaw. Scorch marks along her sides told the story of weapons fire, probably from pirates or raiders. "As you can see," Vree said, gesturing with 3 of his arms, "she's beyond salvage. The reactor core is dead. The life support systems are completely fried. Even the hull integrity is compromised in 17 locations. My crew ran a diagnostic when we towed her in 3 months ago. The computer actually laughed at us." Jake walked closer to the ship, his footsteps echoing in the massive hangar bay. He reached out and placed his hand against the cold metal of her hull. Under the scorch marks and damage, he could feel the quality of Earth steel. Humans overengineered everything, building ships 3 times stronger than they needed to be. It made them slower and more expensive, but it also meant they could take a beating that would vaporize most alien vessels. "She got her crew home," Jake said quietly. 23 people made it back to Earth because this ship refused to die. That's got to count for something. Vree's antennae stopped twitching. His translator was silent for a moment, processing the emotion in Jake's voice. Most species didn't understand the human concept of loyalty to inanimate objects. To them, a ship was just a tool. When it broke, you got a new one. "You have a strange species," Vree finally said. "Sentimental about metal and circuits." "Maybe. But our metal and circuits bring us home. Not this time. The ship is dead, human. The cost to repair her would buy you 3 new vessels." Vree pulled up a holographic display showing the damage report. The list scrolled for several seconds. "See? Reactor, navigation, life support, engines, weapons, shields, all require complete replacement. And that's just the major systems." Jake studied the report, nodding slowly. He'd expected as much. The Horizon Runner had been attacked by pirates in the Omega Sector 14 months ago. The crew had fought back, but they'd been outgunned. In the chaos, someone had hit the reactor with a lucky shot. The ship had gone dark, drifting in space with no power, no heat, and no way home. Except the crew had survived. They'd jury-rigged life support using emergency batteries. They'd manually aligned the backup thrusters. And somehow, they'd limped into the nearest shipping lane where a commercial freighter had picked up their distress beacon. The Horizon Runner had been towed to this scrapyard and abandoned. The insurance company had written her off as a total loss. The crew had scattered to new assignments. Everyone had forgotten about her. Everyone except Jake. "How much for the salvage rights?" Jake asked. Vree's antennae twitched again, faster this time. "You're serious? Human, this is a waste of your credits." "How much?" "For you? Nothing. 0. I'll waive the salvage fee entirely." Vree made a gesture that might have been a shrug in his species. "Take it, please. It's been sitting in my bay for 3 months, taking up space I could use for actual salvage. If you want to waste your time trying to fix it, be my guest. Maybe you can sell a few components to a museum that collects human artifacts. Jake pulled out his datapad and started the transfer paperwork. Around him, other salvagers had stopped working to watch. A Hushin merchant was talking to his partner in their clicking language, probably placing bets on how long it would take the stupid human to realize his mistake. You know, Vri said as Jake signed the documents, in 30 years of running this station, I've never seen anyone claim a ship this far gone. Most species would have recycled her for raw materials by now. Most species aren't human, Jake said. He finished the last signature and looked up at the Horizon Runner. We've got a bad habit of not giving up on things. Stubbornness is not the same as wisdom. No, but sometimes it's better. The paperwork went through. Officially, Jake Morrison now owned one absolutely worthless Earth vessel. He arranged for a tow to a repair dock he'd rented on the cheap side of the station. The kind of place where you did your own work and nobody asked questions. As the tow drones attached cables to the Horizon Runner and began pulling her away, Jake allowed himself a small smile. Vri was right about one thing, the ship was a wreck. The reactor was dead, the systems were fried, and any sane person would scrap her for parts. But Jake knew something that Vri didn't. Something that every advanced alien species in the galaxy had missed when they'd scanned the wreck and dismissed it as worthless junk. The Horizon Runner's fuel reservoir was still sealed, still intact, and still holding the most valuable substance in the known universe. Jake had been there when they'd found it 2 years ago on a mining survey near the Omega sector. He'd been just a junior mechanic, but he'd seen what the science team had discovered on that abandoned moon. He'd watched them seal the samples in the fuel reservoir with emergency protocols that were above even the captain's security clearance. The pirates who'd attacked them hadn't been random raiders. They'd been sent by someone who knew what the Horizon Runner was carrying. But in the chaos of the battle, the secret had been lost. The ship had been written off, and everyone assumed the samples had been destroyed or lost to space. Everyone except Jake. Now he owned the ship, and nobody had thought to check what was actually inside that sealed fuel reservoir. Why would they? It was just a fuel tank on a dead ship. Jake watched the Horizon Runner disappear into the docking tunnel, pulled by the tow drones. In a few hours he'd begin the real work. Not repairing the ship, that was just for show. The real work was figuring out how to use what was hidden inside her without anyone noticing. Because if the galaxy found out what Jake had just claimed from the scrapyard, this worthless piece of junk would become the most fought-over vessel in known space. And Jake would become either the richest man alive or the most hunted. Probably both. 3 weeks had passed since Jake had towed the Horizon Runner to the cheap repair dock on the outer ring of the station. 3 weeks of making noise, filing paperwork, and pretending to struggle with basic repairs. He'd made sure everyone saw him buying the cheapest replacement parts available. He'd asked stupid questions to other mechanics. He'd even accidentally shorted out a power coupling in a way that made the entire dock lose lights for 20 minutes. The other salvagers thought he was incompetent. Perfect. But tonight was different. Tonight, the station was on night cycle, and most of the workers had gone to sleep or headed to the recreation levels. The dock was quiet except for the hum of life support systems and the occasional clang of metal expanding and contracting in the temperature shifts. Jake stood in the engine room of the Horizon Runner, staring at the sealed hatch that led to the fuel reservoir. His hands were sweating inside his work gloves. This was it. The moment he'd been working toward for 3 weeks. The hatch had 3 layers of security. The first was a standard mechanical lock that any engineer could bypass. The second was an electronic seal that required command-level authorization. The third was something the Horizon Runner's crew had installed themselves. A biometric scanner keyed to specific crew members. Jake had been one of those crew members. He pressed his palm against the scanner. Nothing happened for 5 long seconds. Then a green light flickered and he heard the sound of internal bolts sliding back. The hatch hissed as pressure equalized, and then it swung open on smooth hinges that hadn't been used in over a year. Cold air rushed out, carrying a faint smell of ozone and something else. Something Jake couldn't quite identify. He grabbed his flashlight and climbed down the ladder into the reservoir chamber. The chamber was roughly the size of a small bedroom, with walls lined with containment equipment and monitoring systems. In the center stood the reservoir itself, a cylindrical tank about 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, made of layered materials that Jake knew included lead, titanium, and several exotic alloys that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. The reservoir was still sealed. More importantly, the containment field indicator was glowing green. Jake's heart skipped. The ship's reactor had been dead for over a year. Every system should have been offline. But the containment field was active, which meant it was drawing power from somewhere. Or from something. He approached the reservoir carefully, pulling out his portable scanner. The device had cost him 2 months' salary, but it was the best diagnostic tool money could buy without raising suspicions. He ran it over the reservoir's surface, watching the readings scroll across the small screen. What he saw made his breath catch. The power signature coming from inside the reservoir wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. The energy levels were actually increasing over time, not decreasing. Whatever was inside wasn't just storing energy. It was generating it. By itself. Without any external input. Jake pulled up the access panel on the side of the reservoir. According to the safety protocols, he should have worn a full hazmat suit for this. He should have had a containment team standing by. He should have filed approximately 17 different forms with station safety. He did none of those things. Instead, he carefully opened the extraction port, a small valve designed to allow sample removal without compromising the main seal. He attached a shielded container the size of a coffee cup and slowly turned the release mechanism. A thick, silvery liquid began to flow into the container. It moved like mercury but shimmered with colors that shouldn't exist, blues and purples and greens that seemed to shift and change as he watched. The liquid almost seemed alive, pulsing with internal light. Jake sealed the container and brought it over to his makeshift workbench. He'd set up a small laboratory in the corner of the engine room, hidden behind some cargo containers. Nothing fancy, just enough equipment to run basic analysis without anyone knowing what he was doing. He placed a single drop of the liquid onto a slide and put it under his microscope. The structure he saw made absolutely no sense. At the molecular level, the substance appeared to be in constant motion, its particles existing in what looked like multiple states simultaneously. It was like watching something that couldn't decide whether it was liquid, solid, or pure energy. Jake pulled up the classified files he'd copied from the Horizon Runner's computer before the ship had gone dark. The science team's reports were still there, encrypted but accessible if you knew the right codes. He read through the mission logs from 2 years ago. The Horizon Runner had been conducting routine mining surveys in the Omega sector when they detected unusual energy readings from an unmarked moon. The moon wasn't on any charts. It orbited a dead star in a region of space that most ships avoided because there was nothing valuable there. Except there had been something valuable. Very valuable. The away team had found a cave system filled with pools of this silvery liquid. Natural occurrence. No signs of artificial creation. It was just there, existing in pools that had probably been there for millions of years. The substance was stable at room temperature, didn't react to most chemicals, and seemed to generate its own energy through a process the science team couldn't explain. They'd called it quantum fuel, but that name didn't really capture what it was. It wasn't fuel in the traditional sense. It was something that existed partially outside normal physics. Jake continued reading. The science team had run tests. When they'd used the substance to power a portable generator, it had produced 10 times more energy than it should have been able to. When they tried to analyze it, their instruments had given contradictory readings. Some tests said it was matter. Others said it was pure energy. A few readings suggested it existed in multiple dimensions at once. The team leader, Dr. Patricia Lynn, had written in her final report that they'd only scratched the surface of understanding what this substance could do. She'd recommended bringing samples back to Earth for proper study. She'd also noted that their discovery site was technically in territory claimed by the Vrexian Empire, and if word got out, there would be legal and political complications. So they'd done what humans always did when they found something valuable, they'd hidden it and tried to smuggle it home. The fuel reservoir had been designed to look ordinary from the outside. Just a standard tank for fusion fuel. But inside it was built like a fortress. Multiple layers of shielding, redundant containment fields, and enough security protocols to protect nuclear weapons. Jake set down the datapad and looked at his sample container. Such a small amount of liquid, but if the reports were accurate, what he held in his hands could power the entire station for years. Maybe decades. He decided to run one more test before sealing everything back up. He took a burned-out circuit board from a pile of damaged components. The board was trash, headed for recycling. Half the circuits were melted, the connections were fried, and there was visible carbon scoring across the surface. Jake used a tiny applicator to place a single drop of the quantum fuel onto the damaged area. At first, nothing happened. Then the liquid began to spread, flowing across the circuit board like it was searching for something. When it reached the damaged sections, something incredible occurred. The damage began to reverse. Jake watched in stunned silence as burned circuits became whole again. Melted connections reformed. Carbon scoring faded away. It was like watching a video play in reverse, except this was happening in real time, right in front of his eyes. Within 2 minutes, the circuit board was completely repaired. Not just functional, it looked factory new. Jake tested it with his multimeter. Perfect conductivity. Zero resistance. Every connection working exactly as designed. The quantum fuel had somehow reversed the damage. Not healed it. Not patched it. Literally reversed it as if the damage had never occurred. Jake sat back in his chair, his mind racing through implications. If this substance could repair physical damage by reversing it at a localized level, what else could it do? Could it heal injuries? Reverse aging? Repair damaged organs? The Horizon Runner's crew hadn't just found a new fuel source. They'd found something that could revolutionize medicine, manufacturing, construction, and every other field that dealt with entropy and decay. And it was sitting here, in a worthless wreck, in a forgotten corner of a scrapyard, where every advanced species in the galaxy had looked at it and seen nothing worth their attention. Jake carefully sealed the sample container and returned it to a shielded storage box. He cleaned up his workspace, making sure no trace of the quantum fuel remained visible. Then he climbed back up to the reservoir chamber and sealed the hatch, resetting all the security protocols. As he worked, his mind was already planning the next steps. He couldn't use this openly. The moment anyone knew what he had, the Horizon Runner would be seized. Questions would be asked about where it came from. The Vrexian Empire would claim ownership. Earth's government would want control. And Jake would end up either dead or disappeared into some black site research facility. No, he needed to be smart about this. First, get the ship flying. Build a cover story that made sense. Then figure out how to use this discovery without getting killed. Jake looked around the engine room one last time before heading back to his quarters. The Horizon Runner was still a wreck on the outside, but inside her sealed fuel reservoir she carried humanity's most dangerous secret. And now Jake had to figure out what to do with it. Jake developed a routine over the next 2 months. Every morning he'd show up at the dock looking tired and frustrated. He'd complain loudly about how difficult the repairs were going. He'd order the wrong parts, then have to send them back and order again. He'd accidentally damage components that were already working. He became known around the station as that stubborn human who refused to admit he'd bought a lost cause. The other mechanics started making jokes. Vree would pass by occasionally and shake his head, his antennae drooping in what Jake had learned was pity. Even the dock supervisor, a grumpy Kelton named Brex, stopped charging him late fees. Everyone figured Jake would give up eventually. Nobody suspected that every mistake was deliberate. Every delay was planned. Every moment of visible incompetence was carefully calculated. Because at night, when the station shifted to sleep cycle and the corridors grew quiet, Jake did the real work. He'd enter the Horizon Runner through the cargo bay, seal the doors behind him, and activate the privacy screens he'd installed. To any external sensors, the ship appeared dark and dormant. Inside, Jake worked by the light of portable lamps, rebuilding the vessel from the inside out. The first challenge was power. He couldn't just connect the quantum fuel directly to the ship's systems. That would show up on every sensor within 100 miles. The energy signature would be like lighting a flare in the darkness, announcing to everyone that something impossible was happening inside the dead ship. Instead, Jake designed a dual system. He bought a cheap, used fusion reactor from a salvage dealer, the kind of reactor you'd find on a mining shuttle or small cargo hauler. Nothing special. Nothing that would raise eyebrows. He installed it in the main engine room, connected it to the ship's power grid, and made sure all the external connections looked standard and legitimate. But behind the reactor, hidden behind access panels and false bulkheads, Jake built a second system. This one tapped directly into the quantum fuel reservoir. The setup was elegant in its simplicity. The quantum system would do the actual work of powering the ship, but it would route everything through the fusion reactor first. To any outside observer, the Horizon Runner would appear to be running on normal fusion power, burning fuel at expected rates. The quantum fuel would be invisible, hidden in plain sight. Jake worked 12-hour nights, his hands cramping from holding tools, his eyes burning from staring at circuit diagrams. He ran power conduits through spaces that weren't meant to hold them. He modified control systems to accept input from sources they weren't designed for. He basically rewired the entire ship while making it look like he was barely managing to fix the basics. During the day he made sure to look exhausted. He'd stumble into the station cafeteria, order the cheapest food, and sit alone while other salvagers whispered about him. The crazy human. The one who thought he could fix the unfixable. Let them think that. It was perfect cover. 6 weeks into the restoration, Jake ran his first test of the quantum system. It was 3 in the morning, station time. He triple-checked that all the privacy screens were active and that no one was in the adjacent docks. He activated the quantum tap, routing just a trickle of power through the hidden conduits. The lights in the Horizon Runner flickered once, then glowed steady and bright. Jake checked his instruments. Power flow was stable. Energy output was within acceptable ranges. And most importantly, the external signature matched what you'd expect from a standard fusion reactor. Jake allowed himself a moment of pride. It was working. The ship was drawing power from an impossible source and nobody could tell. But the quantum fuel had one more surprise waiting for him. A week later, Jake was working on the navigation computer. The core processor was badly damaged with several circuit boards completely fried. He'd ordered replacements but they wouldn't arrive for another 3 days. In the meantime he was trying to salvage what he could from the existing hardware. He was running diagnostics when he noticed something strange. One of the circuit boards he'd tested yesterday, one that had been completely dead with visible burn damage, was now showing partial functionality. Jake pulled the board out and examined it under his work light. The burn marks were still there but they looked fainter. Less severe. Some of the damaged traces appeared to have regenerated. He checked his notes. Yes, he'd definitely tested this board yesterday and it had been dead. Now it was showing 50% functionality. Jake looked at the quantum fuel reservoir nearby. The power conduits ran close to this workstation. Very close. Was it possible that exposure to the quantum energy field was causing the damaged components to repair themselves? He decided to run an experiment. He took 3 severely damaged circuit boards and placed them in a shielded box. Then he moved the box next to the quantum power conduits and left it there overnight. The next morning, all 3 boards showed significant improvement. Burn damage had faded. Broken traces had partially reconnected. They weren't fully functional yet, but they were definitely better than they had been. Jake realized what was happening. The quantum fuel didn't just generate power. Its energy field had restorative properties. Anything exposed to it for long enough would begin to repair itself, reverting toward its original, undamaged state. This changed everything. Jake started placing damaged components throughout the ship, always near the quantum conduits but never so obviously that it would look intentional if anyone inspected the ship. Burned out processors, cracked hull plating, corroded wiring, damaged sensors. Over the following weeks, all of them began to heal. The hull plating was the most dramatic. Jake had placed several pieces of damaged armor near a quantum tap in the cargo hold. Within 2 weeks, the cracks had sealed themselves. The metal looked newer, stronger. He ran structural tests and found that the plating was actually better than it had been when originally manufactured. Jake started to understand something profound. The quantum fuel wasn't just reversing damage. It was optimizing, making things better. As if the energy field carried some kind of blueprint of what things should be, and it was pushing reality to match that blueprint. He tested it on biological material, specifically on his own hands. Jake's fingers were covered in small cuts and burns from weeks of repair work. One night, he held his hands near a quantum conduit for 15 minutes. The cuts closed. The burns faded. His hands felt better than they had in years. Jake stared at his healed hands and felt a chill run down his spine. The implications were staggering. If this could heal cuts, what about diseases? Injuries? What about aging itself? The Horizon Runner's crew had died protecting this secret. Now Jake understood why. But he couldn't think about the bigger picture right now. First he needed to finish the ship. Make her flyable. Get off this station before anyone started asking too many questions. The restoration continued through the 3rd month. Jake rebuilt the navigation systems, repaired the life support and reinstalled the sensor arrays. All of it was done quietly, carefully, and with deliberate incompetence during the day. He made sure to have public setbacks. One day he accidentally vented atmosphere from one of the cargo bays, triggering alarms that brought station security running. Another time he shorted out the docking clamps, causing the Horizon Runner to drift slightly and bump against the dock wall. Minor incidents. Nothing dangerous. Just enough to maintain his reputation as someone who was in over his head. Brex, the dock supervisor, started a betting pool on when Jake would give up. The odds were updated daily on a board in the station cafeteria. Most people had placed their bets on sometime within the next month. They were all going to lose. By the end of the 3rd month, the Horizon Runner was secretly in better condition than she'd been when she'd left Earth 2 years ago. The quantum restoration had healed damage throughout the ship, and Jake's careful modifications had made her systems more efficient than their original design. But from the outside, she still looked like a barely functioning wreck held together with cheap parts and human stubbornness. Jake filed his flight certification paperwork, deliberately filling it out wrong the first 3 times. When he finally submitted a correct version, the station authority processed it with obvious surprise. They probably hadn't expected him to actually get the ship working. His flight plan was simple and unremarkable. He'd head to New Houston Colony, a human settlement in the outer territories. It was a reasonable destination for someone with a barely functional ship who wanted to limp home to human space. The night before his scheduled departure, Jake did a final check of all systems. The quantum tap was operating perfectly, hidden behind its fusion reactor disguise. The restored components were functioning better than new. The ship's computer had been wiped of anything that might hint at what the Horizon Runner had discovered 2 years ago. Everything was ready. Jake stood on the bridge of his ship, looking out at the scrapyard where hundreds of dead vessels floated in the darkness. 3 months ago the Horizon Runner had been one of them. Written off. Forgotten. Worthless. Now she was about to fly again, carrying a secret that could change everything. Jake just had to make it out of the system without anyone realizing what he had. He sat in the pilot's chair and began the pre-flight checklist. Time to see if all his work had paid off. The morning of departure was cold and gray, at least according to the station's environmental controls. Jake had been awake for hours, running final checks and triple verifying every system. His hands shook slightly as he went through the pre-flight sequence, though whether from excitement or fear, he couldn't quite tell. The docking clamps released with a heavy clunk that echoed through the Horizon Runner's hull. Jake eased the ship away from the dock, using only maneuvering thrusters. The movement was deliberately clumsy, the ship wobbling slightly as if the stabilizers weren't quite calibrated correctly. Through the view screen, Jake could see a small crowd had gathered in the observation lounge. Word had spread that the crazy human was actually attempting to fly his wreck. They'd come to watch what many assumed would be a spectacular failure. Maybe even an explosion. That would certainly make their day more interesting. Jake fired the main engines. They sputtered convincingly, coughed once, then settled into a rough but steady burn. The Horizon Runner began moving away from the scrapyard, her trajectory slightly wobbly but functional. Exactly what you'd expect from a ship held together with spare parts and hope. Inside the ship, however, everything was running smoothly. The quantum system hummed quietly in the background, providing clean, stable power that the external sensors read as coming from the aging fusion reactor. Jake had to admit his cover system was working perfectly. "Attention Horizon Runner," the station's traffic controller called over the comm, "your engine signature is showing irregular fluctuations. Are you experiencing difficulties?" Jake made his voice sound strained. "Nothing I can't handle, Control. She's flying and that's what matters." "Understood. Safe travels, human. You've certainly earned them." Jake thought he detected a note of genuine respect in the controller's voice. He'd been the entertainment around the station for 3 months, but he'd also proven something that most species didn't expect from humans. He'd refused to quit, even when everyone said he should. The Horizon Runner cleared the station's traffic zone and Jake set course for New Houston Colony. It was a 6-day journey through relatively safe space. Established shipping lanes, regular patrol routes, and plenty of traffic. Nothing should go wrong. Jake relaxed slightly as the station disappeared behind him. Maybe this would actually work. Maybe he could make it to New Houston, figure out his next move, and... The proximity alarm blared. Jake's eyes snapped to the sensor display. A ship had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel, appearing roughly 2 million kilometers behind him. Military configuration. Heavy sensors. Weapon systems that read as significantly more advanced than anything a normal patrol ship would carry. The transponder identified it as the Vrexian science vessel Dawn Seeker. Jake's blood went cold. Science vessel. Not military, not patrol, not customs. Science. They knew. His comm system chirped. Jake stared at it for 3 long seconds before accepting the incoming transmission. "Earth vessel Horizon Runner, this is Vrexian science ship Dawn Seeker." The voice was smooth, professional, and speaking perfect English. "Our long-range sensors have detected anomalous quantum signatures emanating from your fuel system. Under Galactic Resource Protection Treaty, Article 47, you are required to heave to and submit to inspection." Jake's mind raced. The treaty was real. He'd studied it during his preparation. Any vessel showing signs of carrying protected or unidentified resources could be inspected by authorized scientific authorities. Refusing was technically legal, but it would flag him as suspicious and bring more attention. But accepting meant they'd board his ship, find the quantum fuel, and that would be the end of everything. "Dawn Seeker, this is Jake Morrison of the Horizon Runner. He kept his voice calm, casual. "I'm running a standard fusion reactor. Your sensors must be picking up interference from the scrapyard. There's a lot of dead ships back there throwing off weird readings. Negative, Horizon Runner. The signature is definitely coming from your vessel. We have been monitoring this sector for several months. We are aware of what your ship may be carrying." Several months. They'd been watching the scrapyard, waiting for someone to claim the Horizon Runner. This wasn't about random inspection. They'd been hunting for this ship specifically. The Dawn Seeker was closing fast. Jake checked the distance. They'd be in weapons range in less than 4 minutes. He looked at his control panel. The Horizon Runner wasn't a warship. She had no weapons, minimal shielding, and in her current state, she shouldn't be able to outrun a dedicated science vessel that probably had military-grade engines. But Jake wasn't running a standard ship anymore. His hand hovered over the controls. What he was about to do was insane. He'd run simulations in his head dozens of times, but he'd never actually tested it. The quantum fuel had shown it could manipulate energy and even reverse entropy. In theory, if he routed enough power through the engines and used the quantum field to manipulate the spacetime around the ship, he might be able to achieve something no human vessel had ever done. In theory. If he was wrong, the ship would tear itself apart. Or create a quantum singularity. Or simply explode. The calculations involved physics that weren't supposed to be possible. Horizon Runner, you have 60 seconds to comply. After that, we will disable your vessel and board by force. Jake made his decision. He'd come too far to give up now. His fingers flew across the controls, bypassing every safety system the Horizon Runner had ever been installed with. He rerouted power from the quantum reservoir directly into the engine manifolds, skipping the fusion reactor entirely. Warning alarms began screaming throughout the ship. The quantum energy flooded into the engines, but Jake didn't use it the normal way. Instead, he fed it into the newly installed field generators he'd built during his secret restoration. These generators weren't designed to create thrust. They were designed to manipulate the fabric of space itself. "Horizon Runner, this is your final? What are you doing?" Jake could hear the confusion in the Vrexian's voice. Their sensors were probably going crazy, showing readings that made no sense. He engaged the quantum field. Reality bent. The Horizon Runner didn't accelerate in the traditional sense. Instead, space compressed in front of the ship and expanded behind it. Jake felt like he was being stretched and compressed at the same time. His vision doubled, then tripled. Colors that shouldn't exist flashed across the view screen. The ship moved. Not flew. Not traveled. Moved. For 5 seconds that felt like hours, the Horizon Runner existed in a state that violated every law of physics Jake had ever learned. The stars outside stretched into lines of light. The Dawn Seeker disappeared from sensors entirely, not because Jake had outrun it, but because the ship was suddenly in a completely different location. Then the quantum field collapsed. Safety systems that Jake couldn't override kicked in automatically, shutting down the exotic power flow. The Horizon Runner dropped back into normal space with a jolt that threw Jake against his restraints. Every alarm on the bridge was screaming. Half the displays showed error messages. Smoke drifted from an overloaded console near the back of the bridge. But Jake was alive. And according to the navigation computer, which had just rebooted and was desperately trying to figure out where it was, the Horizon Runner had traveled approximately 15 light-years in those 5 seconds. 15 light-years. Jake sat back in his chair, his hands trembling. He just moved a cargo hauler across a distance that should have required days of faster-than-light travel. He'd done it in a battered wreck that was held together with improvised repairs. And he'd done it using technology that the galaxy's most advanced scientists said was impossible. The comm system crackled back to life. Jake tensed, expecting to hear the Dawn Seeker's voice again, somehow having followed him. Instead, he heard only static and the automated beacon of a navigation buoy. He checked the sensors. No other ships nearby. The nearest civilization was a small mining outpost about 4 light-years away. He was alone. Safe. At least for now. Jake spent the next 2 hours shutting down alarms and checking for damage. The quantum jump had stressed the ship's systems badly. Several power conduits had melted. 3 hull plates showed microfractures. The navigation computer kept insisting that its position data must be corrupted because ships couldn't move that far that fast. But the Horizon Runner was intact. More importantly, the quantum fuel reservoir was undamaged, and Jake's secret systems were still hidden. If anyone ever did inspect the ship, they'd find a fusion reactor and normal engines. The exotic components were buried too deep, hidden too well. Jake plotted a new course. Not to New Houston Colony, that destination was compromised now. The Vrexians would be watching for him there. Instead, he headed for a small independent station near the border of human space. A place where people didn't ask too many questions. As the Horizon runner limped through space on conventional engines, Jake considered what had just happened. The Vrexians had been watching the scrapyard. They knew about the quantum fuel, or at least suspected it existed. Which meant this wasn't over. They'd keep hunting him. And when they couldn't find him, they'd expand their search. They'd look for other ships that had been in the Omega sector. They'd investigate the coordinates where the Horizon runner had made her original discovery. Jake needed allies. He needed a plan. And most importantly, he needed to figure out what to do with a substance that could revolutionize the galaxy or tear it apart in war. But first, he needed to survive long enough to make those decisions. The stars stretched out before him, and somewhere in that vast darkness, the Dawn Seeker was probably searching for him, wondering how a worthless human cargo ship had just performed a miracle. Jake smiled grimly. Let them wonder. Humans had always been good at doing the impossible when everyone said it couldn't be done. The Horizon runner flew on through the night. Jake spent 3 days drifting in an unmapped system, running diagnostics and trying to understand exactly what he'd done. The quantum jump had worked, but it had also nearly torn his ship apart. Every major system showed stress fractures. The engine manifolds were warped. Half the power conduits needed replacement. But as Jake worked, something strange started happening. The damage began repairing itself. He noticed it first with a cracked display panel on the bridge. On the first day, the crack ran from corner to corner, making half the screen unreadable. By the second day, the crack was smaller. By the third day, it was gone completely, as if it had never existed. The quantum energy was still in the ship's systems, residual traces from the jump. And that energy was healing the damage the jump had caused. The Horizon runner was literally fixing herself. Jake sat in the pilot's chair watching his ship recover, and realized something important. He couldn't run forever. The Vrexians knew what he had, or at least knew enough to keep hunting. Other species would figure it out eventually. Someone would detect the quantum signatures. Someone would ask the right questions. He needed to change the game entirely. Jake spent the next week making copies of everything. Every test result, every scan of the quantum fuel, every technical specification of the systems he'd built. He encrypted the data with codes that only another human could crack, then set up automated transmission protocols. If anything happened to him, if he disappeared or died, the information would be released automatically to every major news network, scientific institution, and government in known space. It was insurance. But it was also leverage. Then Jake did something that everyone would later call either brilliant or completely insane. He set course for the Vrexian home system. The journey took 2 weeks through established shipping lanes. Jake kept the Horizon runner running on standard fusion power, deliberately staying within speed limits and filing proper flight plans. He looked like exactly what he was pretending to be, a human civilian in a beat-up cargo ship heading to Vrexian space for legitimate business. Station security at the border checkpoint barely glanced at his papers. Just another human trader. They scanned his ship, detected a standard fusion reactor, and waved him through. Jake almost laughed. The most valuable substance in the galaxy, and he just carried it past military sensors because nobody thought to look beyond the surface readings. 3 days later, the Horizon runner docked at Vrexia Prime's commercial station. Jake filed a request for a diplomatic meeting, citing urgent information regarding unauthorized scientific research in neutral space. The kind of vague, bureaucratic language that wouldn't be ignored but wouldn't cause immediate alarm. It took 2 days of waiting, sitting in cheap station housing and eating terrible processed food before Jake got his meeting. They brought him to a government complex that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black stone. Jake was escorted through security checkpoints, scanned 4 times, and finally led into a conference room with windows overlooking the Vrexian capital city. A single Vrexian waited for him. Her scales were deep blue, indicating high rank in their hierarchy. Her name, the translator told Jake, was High Researcher Venna. "You requested this meeting," Venna said without preamble. "You have 3 minutes to justify wasting my time." Jake reached into his jacket slowly, making sure the guards in the corner didn't think he was pulling a weapon. He withdrew a small container, no bigger than a shot glass, and placed it on the table between them. Inside, quantum fuel shimmered with impossible colors. Venna's scales rippled, surprise quickly masked. "What is that?" "You know exactly what it is," Jake said. "Your science teams discovered it 18 years ago in the Omega sector. You've been trying to synthesize it ever since with 0 success. You've kept it classified because you can't figure out how it works, and you can't let other species have something you can't control." Venna's eyes narrowed. You're making accusations without evidence.
Am I?
Jake pulled out a datapad and slid it across the table. That contains coordinates, dates, and expedition records. Your government has had teams searching that region for nearly 2 decades. The Dawn Seeker that tried to intercept me? That's the third science vessel you've sent to monitor ships that visited the Omega sector. Venna picked up the datapad, her clawed fingers scrolling through the information. Her scales continued to shift colors, betraying emotions her face didn't show. Even if this were true, she said carefully, what do you want?
A deal.
Jake leaned forward. You can't synthesize the quantum fuel. You can't control it. You barely understand it. But I can use it. I've already proven that. You jumped 15 light years in a cargo ship. Venna's voice was flat. Yes, we detected the energy signature. Our scientists have been arguing for 2 weeks about whether the readings were even possible. They were possible. And that's just the beginning. Jake tapped the container. This substance can do more than power ships. It can heal damage, reverse entropy, potentially cure diseases and repair injuries. It's the most valuable discovery in galactic history, and right now only I know how to actually use it. So you came here to gloat? I came here to prevent a war. Jake's voice hardened. Because if I go public with this, every species in the galaxy will want it. They'll tear apart the Omega sector looking for more. They'll fight over mining rights. And humanity will be right in the middle of that fight because I'm the one who figured out how to make it work. Venna set down the datapad. What are you proposing? Joint research. Open access. Humanity leads the technical development because we've already made breakthroughs you haven't. Your empire provides the political framework and shares credit for the original discovery. We bring in other species as partners, not competitors. Everyone benefits and nobody goes to war over it. And if we refuse? Jake pulled out another datapad. Then I release everything I know to the galactic press. Your empire's reputation collapses when everyone learns you've been hiding a strategic resource for 18 years. Every treaty partner you have will question whether they can trust you. And you still won't understand how to use the quantum fuel, while I'll be selling the technology to the highest bidder. The room was silent except for the hum of the station's life support. Jake could see Venna thinking, calculating angles. The Vrexians were logical. They'd weigh the options and choose the path that benefited them most. You're offering us partnership, Venna finally said, in exchange for legitimacy. I'm offering to not destroy your empire's credibility, Jake corrected. The partnership is how we all profit from this without killing each other. Venna's scales shifted to a pale green. Decision made. I'll need to consult with the council. This is beyond my authority. You have 48 hours. After that, I start making calls. The meeting lasted another 6 hours. More Vrexian officials arrived. Scientists who peppered Jake with technical questions. He answered just enough to prove he knew what he was talking about, but not enough to give away all his secrets. Military advisors who tried to intimidate him and failed. In the end, the Vrexians agreed to a preliminary framework. Not out of kindness or cooperation, but because Jake had made the math simple. Working with him gave them controlled access to revolutionary technology. Fighting him meant chaos, loss of credibility, and potential war with multiple species. The formal announcement came 3 months later. The Quantum Research Initiative, a joint project between humanity, the Vrexian Empire, and 6 other major species, dedicated to studying and developing applications for quantum reactive materials discovered in neutral space. All findings to be shared openly among participating members. The discovery site in the Omega sector was declared neutral scientific territory, protected by treaty. Mining would be carefully controlled. Research would be transparent. And Jake Morrison, the human who'd claimed a worthless wreck from a scrapyard, became the technical director of humanity's delegation. 2 years after that first announcement, Jake stood in a research facility on Earth, watching the first medical application of quantum restoration technology save a child's life. Damage from a genetic disorder that should have been permanent was reversed, the child cells literally healing themselves back to healthy states. The Horizon Runner sat in a museum now, her hull polished and her story told to millions of visitors. The official version said she'd been carrying experimental research materials when attacked by pirates. Close enough to the truth. But in a dozen secured facilities across human space, samples of quantum fuel waited in specially designed containers. Research continued. New applications were discovered monthly. The galaxy was changing and humanity was at the center of that change. Jake trained new engineers now, teaching them to think beyond conventional limitations, to see potential where others saw worthless junk. To understand that sometimes the most valuable things were hidden in plain sight, dismissed by those too sophisticated to look closely. One evening, a young engineer asked him how he'd known the Horizon Runner was worth saving. How he'd known she carried something precious when everyone else had seen only scrap. Jake thought about that moment in the scrapyard, standing before a dead ship that everyone had written off. He remembered placing his hand on her scarred hull and feeling the quality of Earth engineering underneath the damage. Humans build things to last, he finally said. We over-engineer everything because we know the universe is dangerous and unforgiving. Sometimes that makes our ships slower or more expensive than alien designs. But it also means we build things that can survive when everything goes wrong. He looked at the young engineer. The Horizon Runner's crew knew they'd found something worth protecting. So they built a hiding place that could survive anything. They bet that someday, another human would find her and see past the damage to what was hidden inside. And you were that human. No, Jake said. I was just the first one who looked. If I hadn't claimed her, eventually someone else would have. Because that's what we do. We don't give up on things. We don't accept that something is worthless just because it's damaged. We look deeper, work harder, and find value that others miss. The engineer smiled. Take the spaceship, it's worthless. But we took it anyway, Jake finished, and changed the galaxy. Outside the window, stars glittered in the night sky. Somewhere out there, the Omega Sector held pools of quantum fuel that had existed for millions of years, waiting to be found. Other discoveries waited too, hidden in places that seemed barren or worthless to those who didn't look carefully enough. The galaxy was full of treasure disguised as junk. You just had to be human enough to see it,